Okay, we're doing recording now. Okay, and well, welcome to everybody to the meeting. And we're basically just sort of give a theme is coming to America, and everybody here can trace their ancestry back to someone who came to the New World. There's no, as far as anyone knows, no indigenous human populations in the New World. So if you're Native American, you can trace yourself to someone who crossed the land bridge in the Ice Age. If you're someone like Jorgen, you can trace yourself to when you came over to America. Or if you're someone like my wife, you can trace yourself back to the pilgrims who came to America in the 17th century. So we all have a story. We may not know the details, or we may know it, but I think it's sort of a common denominator
There,
for everybody that we have
it
a
moves.
story. And
Literally, it's in the center, Mom. The camera doesn't move.
Okay, so and we welcome everybody here. And if you're not speaking, we would you're welcome to mute your microphone so we don't get background noises. So we've asked Paul to talk a little bit, and and okay, and about book he's read, and it's relevant to the topic. So, Paul, do you want to start the meeting?
Okay. Well, I was talking about the 1,000-year anniversary of the martyrdom of Saint Olaf, which is coming up in 2030. And he was the famous king who Christianized Norway. And ultimately, his legacy in the New World then, in part, was the founding of a college named after him, St. Olaf College in Northfield, Minnesota. And my wife and I went there. And recently a book came out, Moose versus Moose, which is about the founder of St. Olaf College and a Norwegian Lutheran pastor by the name of Bernd Julius Moose. And he was the very first Norwegian Lutheran pastor to come to Goodhue County, Minnesota, which was a major center of Norwegian immigration to America, and he founded dozens of churches there, including the Holden Church in 1859. He was to be pastor of that church for 40 years till 1899. Um, just running forward a bit, he went back to Norway in late 1899 to stay with his daughter who was in Trondheim. He died in Trondheim in May of 1900 and is buried in the graveyard adjacent to to Nidaros Cathedral. So the founder of St. Olaf College is buried in the churchyard adjacent to the place where St. Olaf himself is buried. So as a bit of transatlantic irony, perhaps, in that. Well, I don't want to give you this full book. It's a long book, but I do want to just talk about this. Um, he was the very first Norwegian Lutheran pastor to come over to Goodhue County. He was part of this wave of 800,000 Norwegians who came to the United States. A larger percentage of Norwegians emigrated to the US than any other nationality except for the Irish. So they called it Poor Little Norway then, Stokkar's Little Norge. And what was incredible then was to see how well these people did in the New World. So, anyway, Pastor Moose founded dozens of congregations. Over his lifetime, he baptized many thousands of people, united over 1,200 couples in marriage, and did all this stuff. And then this book, Moose versus Moose, shows that he was also at the center of the first big scandal within the Norwegian Lutheran Church in America, in that he turned out to be a real ogre as a husband. And his wife had a very public split with him, which was reported in the newspapers in Minnesota and nationally and even internationally. it's one of the things that I didn't realize until I read this book is that there were so many fluent speakers of Norwegian in the United States then that there was this very highly developed interchange of ideas and thoughts between the Norwegians in America and the Norwegians in Norway in Norwegian. Of course, today we're also Americanized. We speak English as our native language, but back then they spoke in Norwegian. So this huge scandal then got a lot of coverage, and it was almost all totally favorable to Mrs. Moose. And she was able to get her story into the newspapers, and the newspapers ran with it and really ran down Moose. Anyway, to cut to the chase here, they eventually got what was called a separation, a legal separation or limited divorce. And she got then an alimony, and she also got an inheritance back. Her parents had left her an inheritance of $4,000 then, which would be about $120,000 now. And Pastor Moose did not even tell her about the inheritance. And he also just took control of it, because in Norway, men had total control of the money of their spouses. In America, however, they changed it. The law had changed. And so the wife in America was allowed to recover her inheritance. She moved out of the parsonage, and she lived for the rest of her life. She was to live for another 40 years as a divorcee. And there was a lot of, I think, stigma attached to it at that time. But she made a go of it. She did piano lessons and all the rest. The book, or her revelations about Pastor Moose, were very unflattering. The guy seemed to be a real skinflint. He was a skinflint. Out of his whole pastor's salary each year, he gave about 15% of it to his wife to pay for food, clothing, and general upkeep of the household. And so she did sewing jobs and knitting jobs outside the home in order to make ends meet. And there was a lot of controversy also about the fact that the pastor had been very slow to provide medical care for her. And he was very cheap on heat. And one of their children, she bore 6 children by him. One of the children died of tuberculosis. In fact, the child mortality rate, was very high at that time. Only 2 of their 6 children outlived her. So anyway, it was quite an eye-opening book, and I think you can see the reason that St. Olaf College is never named a building after Pastor Moose. So anyway, I think I've spoken enough here, because we've got a lot of other people who will want to talk, but I highly recommend this book, Moose versus Moose, M-U-U-S. I should mention that when I graduated from St. Olaf in 1971, I had a classmate who was descended from them, Paul Moose, and very nice guy, music major. His father was in my father's class in 1949. The father's name was Ham Moose. I don't know what kind of parent gives a child a name like Ham Moose. But anyway, there you have it with the Moose family.
Okay, thank you.
Very interesting.
Very interesting. Okay, we're going around. Try to give everybody a chance to talk. Jorgen, do you want to talk a little bit about your coming to America story? Unmute.
Can you unmute him?
No, he's.
So my story is just very boring as an immigrant story, because I came here first as a student, went back to Norway, came here, was going to stay for 2 years, and met a girl this was in California, and I met a girl from New York, and 40 years later, I'm kind of halfway home, but since we lived in California initially. But we have actually moved back and forth, so it's not very exciting. But one thing which I could mention, which those of you who don't speak Norwegian No, it's getting a lot of attention in Norway also, of course. And Aftenposten, which is the biggest newspaper in Norway, they have had a series of immigrant stories. And one of them, for example, which is the latest one, which I happen to print it out, but it says, why did the Norwegian Americans become so conservative? So it's interesting. It talks about, that they stayed in communities, and of course, they developed to a certain extent a little bit different from Norwegians in Norway, in the sense that their story was really their parents' story or grandparents and so on. So their interest is in a Norway that to a certain extent doesn't exist anymore. And then, of course, for people who stayed there, things have changed also. So it's actually been quite interesting, and they have some very interesting stories about different people. I hope they will make sort of like an English version of it, because it's very well made, and as was mentioned here earlier, about a third of the Norwegian population did emigrate. As you said, it's only Ireland that had a higher percentage, and so when we say that there's as many Norwegian Americans as there are Norwegians, it's sort of a yes, but it's like my kids. My wife's family is from Germany, German on both sides, but our kids, and my daughter was born in Norway. Our son was born here in the US, so they kind of consider themselves, half Norwegian or Norwegian. So they would probably count as two, but of course, to a certain extent, means like I had tripled the number of Norwegians here. So that's in my family. So that's a little bit sort of, But it was a huge immigration, and as you said, they have a lot of things from Norway. You mentioned, and just give me another minute. So King Olaf, of course, he became a saint. I don't think he would have become a saint today, because his way of Christianizing the country, or bring Christianity in, was basically the take it or die method, which I don't think the church accept anymore. So but it is he's of course the most famous king, and he certainly started or kick-started the transformation. But they found there were people who worshipped in the old gods up to around 1700. Was in Mandal, or one of these, or Kristiansand, in one of the southern cities, where they found a family that had, in secrecy, because it was banned, worshipped still Odin and Thor and all those good old guys. So anyway, that's my story. Is very, from an immigrant view, it's pretty boring.
Well, can they hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
I missed the phrase of how he converted everybody. Did you say militarily or something?
Well, we jokingly said he used the kill it, take it or die method.
Oh.
Yeah.
So because one of the things they did, according to the sagas, was if you refused, they would drop a rat down your stomach. Well, we don't know if they actually did that, but that's the story. So, but certainly it wasn't a sort of, if you were one of the king's men, you
Yeah.
pretty much had to convert. So, but of course the other side was supported by the Danish king, who wanted to have Norway as a part. So just like in today's world, there was more than, it was not only a religious war, it was a war between families and countries to a certain extent.
So, okay, that's interesting. Is anyone else want to share their story right now? I can.
I'd like to share my story
Okay, Pat, you go ahead.
because I'm hearing thunder here in West Virginia. My I only had one grandmother that I knew. The others had all died. And I didn't even know where one set of grandparents was buried. I think I was about 10 or 12. And I was so shocked finally when I found on Find a Grave the location in Baltimore City of where my grandfather and grandmother were buried. And Bill tramped around the graveyard in the heat one August and looking for the tombstone, and we found it. And a dear aunt was buried there too, and I was very emotional about finding that particular grave site. That was my German ancestors, my father's side.
Well, quick note, why it was hard to find is that there was two names on the gravestone. Their family name was on one side, but there was another family's name on the other side of the gravestone. I guess that was a little
I think
bit
it was my aunt.
aunt, so they had two different names
So
on
the tombstones were front and back. You had to walk around every one of them. Right?
Right.
Thank you for doing that.
Okay.
On my mother's side, she misled me and kept saying, oh, she's descended from the Dutch in New York. And we traveled to Newcastle, I think, in Delaware, to search for the descendants of Peter Stuyvesant. And he did not have any lineage with that name continuing on the records there, but I researched from the top down because I had been unable to go from the bottom up. Then Ancestry.com comes along, and that is just a real time saver. I have not gotten back to the original records. I have trusted what I read on there. But it seems like my mother was not only early Dutch settlers, but also Pilgrim settlers. So that was edifying to me. And none of our family knew that we had 8 ancestors on the Plymouth ship called the Mayflower. And they came to America, obviously for religious persecution, to avoid that. And I think my German grandfather was out to make some money, make his fortune. He was a clockmaker from the Black Forest and came and he worked for West Clocks. Clock and watchmaking. And his second cousins over in the Black Forest have huge factories and so on and make the clocks and the cuckoo clocks and everything. So that was a fun connection to make. His name is associated with a line of model train models. If you've ever into model trains, you might have seen the word Faller, F-A-L-L-E-R, on many train sets. They're not real popular here in the States. I can find them when I look because they're so Germanic in flavor and they're not, your typical city. And what else can you think of that's...
Well, do you want to mention the witches?
No. Everybody was accused of witchcraft back then.
Yeah,
It's no big deal. It's no big honor.
Yeah,
Certainly not a big honor.
The one case that they do know is that the evidence against her was that her cows were giving sweet milk and everyone else's cows were giving sour milk. And that was, well, what more evidence do you need? So, it just sort of reminds us how, our idea of justice and the idea of evidence might not have been what our ancestors would have looked at.
In the Black Forest, there are a lot of Hexenloch. is one of the villages, and a lot of witch museums and witchcraft down there. I think it was very common for the day, of course. And then this particular man who was burned at the stake for witchcraft, he, now has a masses set for him into perpetuity. And it's very funny. Now the family is expanded into wineries and wine labels and stuff in Alsace and Lorraine. So that whole part of Germany, I think, is really picturesque and interesting. Must have attracted me to Bill.
And in any case, you did also find some pilgrims in your background.
I've already mentioned that. My mother's people were
Yeah.
on the Mayflower.
Yes, and you have 4 relatives on that, so yeah,
8
so
ancestors.
8 ancestors.
Of course, you get a kid, and their parents are both going to be on the ship with them, so that's 6 right there.
And you're also related, a distant cousin to the previously mentioned Franklin Delano Roosevelt.
There's many,
Okay.
millions of people descended.
There's 20 million people in the United States who are
No
descended.
great honor. You've
No.
always told me 10 million.
Well, something like that, quite a few. Anyways, anyone else want to share a story?
I would a little bit, if that's okay.
Go ahead, sure.
Hi there, calling in from Florida. My mother's grandfather came from Norway. He was born in 1860 in southern Norway, which is in a little fishing village. And he was working on the ships as a young man. I'm not sure what kind of shipping, or if it was sailing boats or steamships, I don't know. But it was a really hard life. I came across a love letter from him to his wife at one point. He bought this beautiful, expensive stationery in, I think in a German port. And he wrote her this lovely religious and romantic letter. That's the only relic I have of either of them. So they got tired of the shipping life when he had children. So he decided to settle in America and brought his wife over around 1890. And there, I believe he worked for the railroad. It might have been connected to the shipping industry. So they settled in New London, Connecticut. There weren't a lot of Norwegians then. I have cousins over in the Dakotas and the Minnesotas and all that, I know a lot of my people, my ancestor's name was Olson. It's very common. So I'm in correspondence with some of those folks. But they grew up in New London, Connecticut, and they left me no recipes, no nothing except that little love letter. And other than that Norwegian link, which I know they were really strong. My grandmother loved her sisters and everything. I have some photographs of the family in New London. And one interesting little point is they were Lutheran, and the Swedish Lutherans would not allow the Norwegian Lutherans into the church. So they had to have 2 different churches in New London. And I would love to see more Norwegian old recipes. I went to one of the Son of Norway's events in Fairfax, Virginia, a couple years ago, and they had great food, including this rice pudding. You could die for that, right?
Right?
Oh my gosh.
Riskrem.
The rice pudding, so lovely. It was a wonderful event. We lived up there for a long time. And my other ancestors are Irish and British and Swiss, so a normal US mixed bag.
Very good.
Yeah, so, yeah, a lot of us have mixed bag too, yeah.
Was that Olson with a E or an O?
In SEN, I believe.
SEN,
SEN.
sure.
Ole Olsen.
Yes, that's pretty close to as Norwegian name as you're going to get. A nice story though, thank you. Let me just do something. One of my cousins did some investigation of when my grandfather's trip, And here, I believe you can see this. Can you see the share
Yes.
screen? Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay, I'll just read this. And here we have my grandfather's recollection. He was he celebrated his 8th birthday on board the ship. After preparing for a couple of weeks in Bergen, we sailed from Norway aboard a sailing ship. How would you say? Galatia?
The Galatia.
Down the English Channel, where we met a terrible storm that lasted 14 days. When it cleared up, we were surprised to see land, and upon checking, we learned we were alongside the southern coast of Norway. I bet the sailors felt real good about
So
that.
they had come and gotten blown back.
We set out again, once again, and our course for Quebec, Canada, and then up the St. Lawrence River across the Great Lakes. After spending 3 months on the sail ship, we finally disembarked near Milwaukee, Wisconsin. There we continue across vast stretch of land to Vermilion, South Dakota. My mother's brother, Ollie Olson Stronghog,
Step hug.
had gone to America in 1866 and was settling on a farm near Vermilion, and we came to him. So this was in 69. Now, I mean, I'm just sort of thinking of the 7-year-old. This is the picture of the farm, if I get that right. Here's a picture of the
I
farm.
can't spell that. Pull it back a little bit to get the whole form.
Yeah, okay, and I've been there. It's a beautiful valley in Norway, and my one of the family stories is that my grandfather, when he was 7, he would go out and he'd preach to the trees in the valley, and well, he later became a minister, so that's probably a early sign of the vocation. But it's a beautiful place, and leave this place to go to a strange place and speak a different language must have been very traumatic. And we don't know precisely why it is, but a hint might be that they had 3 boys in the family, and it's a fairly small farm. They couldn't very well divide it up. So at this point, if we know from American history, America had the Homestead Act, which was Abraham Lincoln had signed, and was basically anyone come over would get a nice hunk of very good land. So I suspect it was the reason going over is to ensure that all the boys got their own farms. Now, my grandfather and one of his brothers became ministers, so they may have, so they didn't become farmers, but that may have been the reason.
They were from Nostal, the Nos River
And
Valley.
this is a ship. This is a picture of the Galatia, and it was a fairly prominent ship. It was a full rigger. It's like one of those tall ships that we were seeing. I saw at the bicentennial. Apparently it's a beautiful ship. It's interesting. The crossing. There's actually more people on board the ship when it landed than when it set sail. Because one of the women gave birth and none of the people died, which was fairly unusual for sea crossings at that time to have no casualties. Because that's pretty dangerous, and they had to provide their own food, so it's a lot of fish and sardines, and I'm pretty sure they're happy to get on dry land. And here's the ship's list, and Henry was 7 when the ship embarked, but he did celebrate his 8th birthday on ship. Probably not much of a celebration. And
Your mother's maiden name was Solem, Solem,
okay,
changed from Solheim.
Solheim, and that was the Solheim Valley. So they did simplify it. Here's the timeline. They get ready for the trips, and then this is the last Sunday they attended church at services at the Fjord Church. Here's a picture of the family, Thomas, Andreas, Solon, with their 5 children. I always love these pictures in the 19th century. Everyone looks like they had just received a death sentence. You know, I mean, I know that it was felt like if you smiled, that would indicate that you were a trivial person or a childlike or something. But everyone is so grim. Even and I noticed the kids are pretty grim. This is not I just hope they were a little happier in real life than in this picture. And so here's the sort of the timeline. And the 21st, Henrik celebrates his 8th birthday. The glacier arrives at Kruvak and continues to march. Glacier. And then they arrive Milwaukee, and then they have I'm sure less than delightful 800 miles across the prairie. Now, my little quick thing, my grandfather went to Augustana College. He was the first a person to receive a liberal arts degree from Augustana. In fact, in later years, Augustana wrote the family and they asked for his diploma back, presumably so that they can display it as an important part of Augustana's history. He got married, and the year he got ordained, and when he got as part of the ordination and so on, they asked him to get a physical, and the doctor said, well, you have a bad heart and it's going to kill you. And sure enough, it did. He died at 99 of a heart failure. So it eventually caught up with him, but he lived. He had 9 children, my mother being the youngest, and he was pastor of the Lutheran Church in various places in South Dakota. West Prairie, thank you. And an interesting story that my family likes to tell is the services were in Norwegian. Well, a lot of the kids didn't know Norwegian, and some of the wives didn't know Norwegian. So they had a discussion of the parish council about maybe we could have some of the readings in English. And one person very indignantly got up and he said, if Norwegian's good enough for Jesus, it's good enough for us. So that was a little family story. But he was a minister, and then he retired. He came to DC. He lived in DC in the 30s. Some of my uncles came to DC. Well, my uncles and my mother came to DC because she wanted to work at the Library of Congress. And as a coincidence, my father was working at that time. So they met and they started dating. And my father, the family, and they had several uncles, and my grandfather and grandmother were living. And during the week, they would he would invite people over and they would play music. It was a very musical family. My father was a good trombone player, and so they'd come out, they'd buy musical stores, which are apparently pretty popular, and they'd come over and then they would play music as a family activity. Of course, I have to explain this, when I explain this to my grandkids, I have to explain they didn't have television then. Hard to believe, But they apparently found ways, and they got married, and my father ended up being the president of the Washington Lodge, so he became Norwegian. So I guess he couldn't escape it, and that's sort of my family story on my mother's side. And here is. And here's another one again. This little pretty looks like
great grandfather.
great grandfather, and he looks like a pretty formidable person here. So that's my family history, and
Great uncle.
just want to see if anyone else has anything more. Jerry, please.
Yeah, I can talk a little bit. It's good to see everybody. Yeah, my
You,
mother's
Jerry
family.
Erickson, that used to be president?
That's right.
Yes.
Former
Jerry,
president of Washington
wow.
Lodge.
Well, you've been president of 3 lodges, so.
Yes, I have. District 6, District 3, and District 2. And I
Wow.
was district president for the last 6 years in District 2 up until a year ago. So I've been very
Wow.
fortunate to serve Sons of Norway. Yeah, my mother's family came over from Telemark, and they were from Lardal, which was near Morgadal and Kvitside. And there were 3 brothers that immigrated, and they came over in 1845. The 3 brothers all had different last names because they had married ladies in different farms. So when they immigrated, they took the farm names. And so the primary name was Aker, Aker. And then there was Moen and Groven. And so they sailed from Norway, got to New York, and then traveled across through the Great Lakes to Wisconsin, and ended up in a Norwegian community of Koshkonong in central Wisconsin. And basically, they were all farmers at that time. And so they spent a number of years there in Koshkonong, and then moved over to Goodhue County in Minnesota. And so one of my ancestors, Marie Aker, was one of the first registered students at St. Olaf School before it became St. Olaf College.
Wow.
And that was, let's see, about 1860, I guess, something like that. So anyway, a number of Akers have been active and the family have been active with St. Olaf College. Albert Holmquist was a cousin of mine who was a professor there. Also, they were very active down in Decorah, Iowa, at Luther College, and so on. So, but most of the family, a lot of became pastors and things over the years. And both of my grandmothers were Norwegian, and they both married Swedish husbands.
Uh-huh.
So both my grandfathers were Swedish. And anyway, so I grew up in Minnesota, grew up in Minneapolis, and did all the Norwegian things and stuff like that. But we never joined Sons of Norway until I moved to California in 1972. So, but anyway, that's kind of my family. My wife Deanna, her mother's family came from Eidsvoll and lived in Eidsvoll and in Oslo when they immigrated to Washington State. They also came in through Canada and then traveled to the West Coast to live in Washington State here, where we are. So that's kind of a little bit about my family. And my dad's family came from Stavanger, Rogaland area around the turn of the century. And I still have cousins there that we've seen and visited and so on. So anyway, that's just brief history.
Mm-hmm.
Very nice.
Very nice. We all have a story like that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Anyone?
Alan?
I have a question.
Oh.
For the woman there with you, Bill. I don't remember your name.
Pat,
Like Pat. Okay, Pat. I missed. Why did your mother deceive you about her? What was that about?
she did not know that
Oh, she just
we
didn't know.
came from pilgrims. Her people had told her, oh, we go way back in the Dutch line. So I'm thinking Stuyvesant, New York, Connecticut. So she just had no clue. And it
Oh,
turns out, of course, now with the pilgrims, that brings the whole English branch of the family.
I thought maybe she was trying to hide some sort of background. She just didn't know.
She just didn't know.
Knowing
Okay.
Pat's mother, she would have been very proud to be with pilgrims. I mean, it's just really how much people didn't know about their ancestry, and a lot of it was, especially during World War II, World War One, World War Two. People said, "Well, we're Americans, and we were, and not worry or take particular pride in their ethnic ancestry, and." So it's common among people to just ignore or forget about where they came from or get confused about it.
Can I add this?
Yes.
I understand completely. My grandfather's brother was in financial trouble over in Germany, came here and changed his name. And he was hard to track down. We think he's buried somewhere in Indiana.
Yeah, America was sort of a place where people could make a fresh start.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had a cousin, an aunt in Minneapolis who did genealogy. She was a school teacher, and when she retired, she did a lot of genealogy on the Auker family and traced it back to 860 in Norway with Harald Harfager, fair hair. Of course, he had lots of ancestors, so we're
Mhm.
one of many. But
Way.
that was very interesting to see how she traced that back all the way back there.
A number of years ago, I think this in the 1990s, I put my father's information on the internet, and I got email from a Native American person who claims his last name was DeRoche, and he was a descendant of a Charles DeRoche, which was one of my great uncles, and we know his family story. He would do. He lived in Texas, but he would do hunting and hunting for in the Indian territories, and then come back. Now, whether or not he had things that he did when he was hunting that he never bothered mentioning, we don't know. And I wrote back, and the guy never wrote back to me, so I don't know if it might have been someone thought that he could. Might have been a hoax, or try to scam, or scam on the internet, but or it could be a true thing, and he just got tired of waiting for me. But anyway, there's probably lots of things in our family histories that don't exactly bear repetition,
As it is with most
as
families.
with most families. We tend to emphasize the positive, So.
Yeah, that kind of reminds me when I was in Stavanger, Norway last year. We toured this cannery museum, a new cannery museum, and so I went to one of the docents, and I said to him, "Oh, I was in Monterey a few years ago, and there was this little exhibit that talked about, like, basically the person who put Cannery Row on the map for California was a Norwegian immigrant, Newt Hoadvin, right? I had forgotten the name, but then the docent there at the museum in Stavanger said, "Well, you know why he came to America?" And I go, no. And he says, well, he was escaping, like 2 scandals. And he took a financial scandal, and I think he had, something with his marriage or something like that. So he took like all the knowledge that he had, and then he, I guess, transplanted it over in Monterey. So there there can be multiple reasons why people emigrated to America.
Yes.
Yeah.
It sounds
But
plausible because it's just about as far from Norway as you can possibly get. So
Yeah.
Yes.
yeah, and I guess there was a lot of sardines there in the early 1900s. Um, but anyway, I think some of you may have heard, more of my father's story in terms of emigration. So he was in the Norwegian Merchant Marine right at the onset of World War II, and he did convoy runs between Canada and England, and then he got severely ill, and he was sent to recuperate in first in Canada, and then he was transferred down to New York in the Catskills. But long story short, the war's over, and he's like wanting to go back to Norway. So he writes his family and says, basically, can I come back? And then they said, no, you shouldn't.
Oh,
Because if you got a job in America, stay in America for as long as you can, because things are not great in Norway.
After
And
the war.
it was a recipient of all the Marshall Plan aid in the late 40s and all. So uh, and that's where he stayed in the New York City area, and that's where he met my mother. Now, my mother's parents were also relatively new Norwegian immigrants. They came in like 1920, and I think that was kind of shortly before the all those 1922 and 1924 immigration laws came into effect that started to restrict immigration to the United States. So my grandfather on my mother's side, he was also a merchant seaman. And he just decided one time just to, quit being a seaman and start a life in America because he was not the eldest son in his family. So he was from the Bergen area, and he wouldn't have received much of anything. So he decided to make a better life for himself in America. And then same with my mother's uh, grandmother, mother's mother, where she came over and she served as a domestic help for, I guess, wealthy people in the New York area. So they all kind of stayed in the New York area, more specifically in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn, which was kind of a Norwegian haven at the time. And some people called it the like a suburb of Oslo, or it was like the second largest Norwegian city in the world. So a while ago, I gotten this book. So it's called Lopscouts Boulevard, which is basically the history of Norwegians mainly in the Brooklyn area. And it has lots of great historical information, and the author collected a whole bunch of photos from, I guess, different people's photo album. So, and it's almost looks like you're right in Norway. So, I mean, you have a photo of this,
Yes.
at a park. They have different chapters on businesses. So, like, this was the gentleman that ran the funeral home in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn, Halverson, very, I guess, prominent, American of Norwegian descent. So, and they go into the different like restaurants and all that was in the Brooklyn area. And so there was also an Olson's Bakery, very, very prominent. So it's kind of a fun book to go through because it's a lot of the history of Norwegians first they were in Red Hook neighborhood, and then it gravitated to move to Bay Ridge later on. But then after the starting in the 1970s, all the children of these Norwegian immigrants, they scattered and they would go to the suburbs, either, in New Jersey or further in, as they got a college degree and they moved to where their jobs were. So the Norwegian community there in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn is much smaller now these days.
Bill, is that book in Norwegian or in English?
It's in both.
Oh.
So they have side by side.
Now, one other story. Oh,
can you put the title in the chat for me, please?
Sure.
Lopskaus Boulevard.
yeah.
So
How Norwegian can you get?
that's Lopskaus is kind of a stew, if you want to understand it in English terms. It's like whatever was left over at the end of the week, you just put it into a pot. Maybe there would be one new meat in there, like lamb or something, but usually it was like whatever was left over.
Left over.
Yeah.
Can I ask something?
Yeah.
Is there a society or an interest in determining if your ancestors came on the Restauration, the ship, the original ship? That's why you're having this meeting, right?
Yes, right, yes.
So is there a list, passengers?
Yes, and there's an association of descendants of those individuals.
Yeah.
Very good.
I was going to mention that if any of you, I heard some of you said you were going to Norway in the not too distant future. The Norwegian Folk Museum, which is in Oslo, it's this collection of old houses. It's a fantastic area to walk around. And they have, they moved farmhouses and what have you, and also have some more modern buildings. But they have a section there which was the emigration story, and that's where I saw that book that you mentioned also. Actually, they had it displayed there, and they have I assume that it's still there. I'm sure they can keep it at least another year. And they also have a fair amount of, at least when my wife and I went there a year ago, they had a fair amount of books also, both in Norwegian and in English, about the immigrants.
I saw that some great museums, yeah. One thing I just sort of mentioned, Knut Knutsen, who was one of the Knut Knutsens, probably as well as Norwegian name as you can get, but he was became president of Washington Lodge, and I remember talking to him about how he came to Norway. And he, at the beginning, when Norway was invaded by Germany, he was a student in college, and he was working in the registrar. And they came in and they had a list of somehow he got a hold of or saw a list of people that the Germans were going to, Norwegians that the Germans planned to round up and put into camps. And he made a copy of that and gave it to the resistance. And then the resistance came back to him and said, you may not be in a good position. They probably could trace that. Why don't you go to America? And so what he did was he took a skiing vacation to a place, a skiing location right next to the Swedish border. And then they would go out one day and they'd go so on. And then finally they just kept on going and went skied into Sweden. And then he came from Sweden to America. And he pursued his medical studies here, and at the end of the war, he wrote back and said, "What should I do?" And they said, "Look, if you have a good life in America, you're not going to get the same in Norway because World War II was devastating for Norway, as several people have mentioned. They said stay in America, and he stayed in America, and he got a doctorate degree and became a very prominent researcher at NIH, and also president of the lodge and so on, a large family and things like that. But that was just because things in Norway would have been fairly uncomfortable if the Germans found out he had passed that information around. So people have different stories, but definitely, I mean, I think, really, Norway, of course, they benefited greatly from the Marshall Plan, but at the end of the war, they went into the World War II with a very large merchant fleet, and they came out with a very small merchant fleet because of the German U-boats and other problems. So.
Hey,
Well,
Bill.
yeah, Gary.
Yeah. Can I just say something
Sure, please.
without my picture? I guess this is, first of all, Alan Olson, who was just on. Are you there, Alan?
Yes, I'm here.
Where do you live, if you don't mind me asking?
I live in the Twin Cities in Minnesota.
Okay. So you mentioned several things. First of all, I'm from Brooklyn. Are you there?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, I'm from Brooklyn, not from Bay Ridge, and I have no Scandinavian blood in me whatsoever.
But you've been a member for a long time, Gary.
Well, I'm not a member now, but I'm trying to renew.
Ah.
At any rate, I remember a story about Brooklyn and the Norwegian community, and that is the fact that storekeepers, many of whom were of Jewish descent, as I am, learned to speak Norwegian so they could make more sales.
That's interesting. The reason I asked is because I know a little bit of the Norwegian history in Red Hook and Brooklyn just because of these Zoom meetings over the last several years. That's the only reason. And I know a young lady who's Jewish who was living here in Minnesota. We both have a woodworking hobby disease, and she was from Brooklyn, and she went back. Well, I don't know how we got onto a DNA discussion or something like that, and she said, "Oh, I sent in my DNA. I was 98% on. I forget what that on a. It's the Jewish from Eastern Europe. Europe. What's that name? On a. Anyway, she said she was 98% something Jewish, and she said no surprise to me. But she said that because she wanted me to know that she took all her results down because she was afraid of discrimination, frankly, online. And I said, geez, you live in Minnesota. How could you really be that worried about it? But we got in this discussion, and then finally I learned that she was from Brooklyn. I said, oh, there's a bunch of Norwegian history from Brooklyn. And I told her a little bit about Red Hook, what I know. And she said, oh, there are just a bunch of Italians and somebody else there now. There aren't really a lot of Norwegians there. And then she went back to Brooklyn. She's there right now for the summer. And I was thinking maybe she might be interested in that book if I could pick up a copy of it and send it to her.
Probably could get it at Vesterheim.
Mm-hmm.
Can I say one more thing?
Yeah.
Are you there? Are you there?
Yeah.
Okay, you mentioned Monterey. My favorite, just about my favorite place in the world is Monterey. So I know a little bit about the history. And Cannery Row did not become Cannery Row till, I believe, many years after John Steinbeck passed away in his honor. It was Ocean View Avenue or something similar. That's what that Cannery Row is a made up name from the title of his book.
Huh.
I never knew.
Interesting.
And just one last thing. So I'm very pro-Scandinavian, and I try to put people in my writings related to Norway, Sweden, and Denmark. And in the major World War II book that I've been working on for years, which will never get published, the family, the Petersons, come by ship from Norway in the 1920s. And the ship voyage is so rough that it takes weeks for the bruises to go away.
No.
And they go to Brooklyn, stay there about a week, and then go on to the Bay Area, where Mr. Peterson successfully builds ship models. One of my favorite things. And is very busy during World War II building ship models to teach sailors about parts of ships and that type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then so the family there, the boy inherits that business and is still doing it. Fictitious, all fictitious. Anyway, that's all.
All right, very interesting.
Excuse me.
Anyway, I think we've, well, make sure that anyone has anything that they want to say because we're sort of, yes, Paul.
Oh, hi. Well, I just have a few miscellaneous things. One is that the restoration, the rebuilt restoration is now at sea, as you know.
Mm-hmm.
Departed from Stavanger on July 4th, I believe, with the King and Queen of Norway in attendance.
Mm-hmm.
Is expected to arrive in New York City on October 9th. And supposedly the actress Liv Ullmann will be there to greet it, along with anybody else who wants to show up. So the 200th anniversary of Norwegian immigration is very real right now because it was happening even as we speak. I could just mention that last week I was in Wisconsin and I visited the Leavesrise Museum in Stoughton, Wisconsin, which is a new museum totally given over to Norwegian immigration, which I highly recommend that you visit. It's an outstanding brand new museum, and it uses really the latest technology of sort of video technology and digital technology then to explore many different aspects of Norwegian immigration. They also have a back room there where they have exhibitions, and they currently have an exhibition from Vesterheim in Decorah, Iowa. I think these must be, correct me if I'm wrong, the two leading museums of Norwegian immigration to America, Vesterheim and Leavesrise. Vesterheim is far superior in its collection of artifacts. Leavesrise, I think, is superior in its narrative. And but there's a tremendous exhibit, then a traveling exhibit from Vesterheim that's at Leavesrise now. Stoughton is just a few miles south of Madison, Wisconsin. It's easy to reach from Madison, Milwaukee, or Chicago. I highly recommend you go there. Next to the Leavesrise is the Mant Sons of Norway Lodge, which on 3 occasions, I don't remember what years, but they were voted the top lodge in the whole Sons of Norway network 3 times. And Stoughton every year has a huge Syttende Mai festival. And performing there are the famous dancers, the Norwegian folk dancers, who are recruited from Stoughton High School. The Stoughton High School Vikings, I think they are. And so I highly recommend you visit it. There's also a nice cafe downtown called the Coffee Cup. Coffee with a K and cup with a K. And over the door it says Tusen Talk. And until a couple of years ago, the wraps that they served were served in lefse. They're now served in regular tortillas, but back then they served in lefse. So you ought to make Stoughton, Wisconsin high on your list. I should just mention that on the other side of the state is Westby, Wisconsin, which has a ski jump, a huge ski jump. And every year in February, they have an international ski jumping exhibition. And I've been to Westby. There's a wonderful mural in town that says, in Norwegian, says, "Welcome to Westby, come back." And the high school there is the Westby Norseman. And anyway, a Norwegian holds the ski jumping record at the ski jump in Westby. It's 150 meters or something like that he jumped. So America doesn't produce that many ski jumpers anymore. So I just wanted to mention Livsreise and the restoration. And I guess, well, while I'm on a roll here, I'll just mention one of my ancestors, one of my great-grandfathers who came from Norway was also a merchant seaman, except he came over in the time of sailing ships. And his story was that their sailing ship went to Russia at one point. I think it was Murmansk. And he was just visiting the city, and the word went out that the Russian authorities were out impressing sailors to serve on Russian ships. And he had to hide out for 3 days in Murmansk until the coast was clear. He sneaked back on board a ship and got out of Russia. He wound up later in Oklahoma as a settler in Oklahoma, as a sooner or something, or boomer, back in the 1890s. And he failed at that. And he failed as a farmer in Iowa. I think he finally wound up doing running a gas station. His children were all much more successful. But anyway, I think that he was better as a merchant seaman, even though his family did better in the States. I think I've said enough.
All right.
Does anyone know where exactly in New York is the restoration, I don't know, lands or the celebration occurs?
Yeah, it'll be by the South Street Seaport Museum in Lower
Right.
Manhattan.
Yeah.
Right. That's where it landed 200 years ago. And there's a fabulous Seaport Museum, if you go there, has a wonderful history of shipping. I've been there. They've also got an old steel hulk of a famous four-masted German ship called the Peking. It was in the famous P-liners that sailed around Cape Horn around the turn of the 20th century, the 19th to the 20th century, and they have this hulk. All the masts are gone. But there's more interesting information in this hulk then that they have floating there at the Seaport Museum. Sorry.
Okay.
Bill, this Alan Olton, just
go ahead.
Was going to throw out, you said something about Vermilion, South Dakota when you were talking about your grandfather.
Yeah.
I just drove past Vermilion, South Dakota 2.5 hours ago.
Oh, wow.
I was camping in Yankton over the weekend, and I'm on my way home right now. But I wouldn't want to have to make that trip from Milwaukee to Vermilion by foot or ox cart or anything.
Covered wagon.
That would have been brutal.
Yes. Yeah, I think I prefer cars to covered wagons. I mean, it's Yeah, I've been reading the book, rereading the book, Drums Along the Mohawk about the American Revolution, and that was not a pleasant time to live. I mean, we've really gotten spoiled by all these luxuries like coffee machines and air conditioning and so on. Let me just put it.
Bill,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, if I may interject just one other thing. If you look at a map of where Norwegians settled in the United States, most of them settled in the Midwest, especially Northern Illinois, Iowa, Wisconsin, Minnesota, and the two Dakotas. That was the heartland. But there was a certain movement among those people who had difficulty up into Canada. And in fact, about a tenth of the Norwegian Americans, or the people who are descended from Norwegian immigrants, live in Canada today. And you'll notice that Sons of Norway has a major a district in British Columbia. And so it's just interesting. They were called, I think, sort of Minnesota Norwegians or something. They moved up and then they settled on the Great Plains of Canada and Alberta and then British Columbia. So that
Yeah, I have cousins that moved from Minnesota to Saskatchewan and just south of Saskatoon. And there's a big Norwegian population right around that area where they live, and they farm up there.
I think there's a Lutheran seminary up in Saskatoon. I think there was.
I was going to mention also that when you look at the immigration, it was a two-way street at times because there was periods when more people moved back. And one of my two grandmothers, she during World War I, her trade stopped in Norway pretty much because the rest of Europe was at war. And my great grandfather then drank himself to death, basically. So the mother couldn't afford to keep all four children. So she sent the two oldest daughters one to a family in England and the other one family, my grandmother, to some distant relatives I never found out that it was Iowa or Indiana. And I asked my one aunt who's still alive, but she's not certain either. But she went over there, was put in, sure it must have been steerage class, as they called it, was put on a bus, didn't speak any English, walked off, and as all of you know, she was from the west coast of Norway. And as you know, everything is vertical there, right? So she walks off the bus, and as she said, she'd never felt she felt like she was back on the ship because everything was horizontal. And she lived there for a couple of years at least. Again, fortunately, when she told me these things, I didn't make notes, I was too young. So, but, and there's limited, it's mentioned in the family stories, pictures and so on that I have. But at the end of the war, she was told this was World War I, right? So Norway was essentially untouched, except for all this. There were sailors who lost their life, but Norway proper was not involved. And so they said you can come back, and she moved back, and her older sister who was from England, she stayed in England and got married there actually. So there was, when you see that, I remember I saw that there may have been that museum in Oslo where they said, there were periods where actually more people moved back. So, some people, well, obviously most of those who came over here enjoyed it and stayed, and, but there were those who found out it was better to move back.
Yeah, it's a complicated interactions, and it's dangerous to make too much generalizations. Any other observations, please?
Well, we'll be back in Minnesota in about a week and a half, and visiting cousins and friends, high school buddies. And then my daughter lives in Tofte, Minnesota, which is up along Lake Superior. And so we'll be visiting them at south of Grand Marais. Then going over to Moorhead, and then coming down, we'll go through Alexandria and visit the Kensington Runestone on the way back to the cities. So,
okay, yes.
Is my audio working?
Yes.
Yeah. Just thought I would insert a little bit, not getting into a lot of family history, most of which I don't know, but as far as when I emigrated from Norway, um, my parents, my brother, and I, and it was as a result of World War II. The my parents got married just before the war began, and as I'm sure everybody knows, if you were in Norway and would not work for the Nazis, you were going to be put in a concentration camp or killed. And my father uh, was one who did not want to work for the Nazis. He was an engineer, aerospace engineer, and which put him and my mother at risk. And it was decided that they would get them transported through various underground means out of Norway and got them into Sweden. And from Sweden, then they were transported to London uh, to work on the development of radar. So, and my mother was an architect, so she helped with some things there also, but it was primarily my father. And none of the family knew that they had survived. Had an uncle, one of my mother's brothers, who was sent to a concentration camp. He was a teacher, wouldn't teach for the Nazis. And our other brother was an attorney, but he opted to join the army and became an instructor in the army. My mother's side of the family was all from the Oslo area, whereas my father's from the west coast, from Sandnes, near south of Stavanger. And he had one brother who was a meteorologist. Don't really know as far as how things were with him and the family there during the war, but none of the family knew that my parents were alive. They were actually shot at just before they got to got to Sweden. But they spent the all of the years of the war in London, and it was during the latter part of the war. My her one brother was sent to London to do some training there. And it just so happened, coincidentally, he was walking on one of the streets in London, and so were my parents. And they encountered one another, and he learned that my parents were alive. And but of course, he couldn't tell any of the family that they were there or that they were alive. Eventually he made it back to Oslo, and as did my parents later. But it was as a result of his work during the war that he was contacted some years later by what was then Westinghouse, and offered a job. They asked if he would meet them. They sent a representative to Denmark, met with him, and he agreed to take the job, which it was some handful of years afterwards, but after the war ended. But that's how we came to emigrate to the United States. And one of the primary places for Westinghouse, the corporate headquarters, was in Pittsburgh, I believe, but he was offered a position in Baltimore, which was one of their main places. And so my brother and mother and I came on a ship and during a hurricane, but he came over a few months earlier to get established and find housing and such. And so never moved back to Norway. I did make some trips there. Long overdue for going back again, between different family problems that have postponed everything. And my parents are deceased, but I do still have relatives over there. And one of the relatives, no longer alive, I met him briefly and actually met his brother in Connecticut a number of years ago. He and his wife, we found out about and stopped and had a brief visit. But that would be Klaus Hellberg, that was my mother's first cousin and lived on a property adjoining my parents' and my mother's family home. Didn't really get to know him at all, but he's a well-known name for him being one of the primary ones for the successful attack on the heavy water plant.
Mm.
So that was, of course, another important part of my family's participation in the war, and certainly my father with the development of radar, which was his work over there in London, had a lot to do with ending the war, and eventually, of course, my family found out about my parents still being alive when they moved back to Norway, and her other brother came back from concentration camp, so he did survive that. But anyway, that's the basic family history and how we came to emigrate to the United States.
That was really interesting.
Yeah,
Well,
that's
thank
very
you,
interesting.
Ogot.
Yep.
Can I
Yep.
use your real name, Ogot?
Yeah, you can use my real
Ogot Tucker?
Yep, Olga Tucker, yes.
You're among friends here. You could use your Norwegian name.
Yes,
But
that's
anyway,
true. I have that on my name tag. I did get it put on with Olgot, with the O, G-O-T. Marga is my middle name, but that's an easier name for most people. But Olgot
glad
is
to
what,
see-
what's
glad
that?
to see someone else from the hospitality committee here. Look forward to seeing you at the picnic on the 17th.
Yep, I should be there.
Great.
But a very interesting story. I think everybody has these interesting stories. Families oftentimes forget about them, but they have these very interesting history. That goes back centuries. I want to just do a quick plug. We are going to be looking at Crossings 200 and some more individual stories about people and their family history, and we're also what's been written about. One of the things, I don't know if you're familiar with a gentleman named Odd Lovell, but he wrote the book Promise of America, which is about the Norwegian immigration. Very good book. And then he wrote a subsequent Promise Fulfilled. Let me get that. Which is about the sequel, which is the portrait of a Norwegian-American community today. And I have to mention that my family is included in the Promise Fulfilled. So it's pretty inclusive. And also mentioned we're going to have Washington Lodge, and these things are all available on Zoom. We're going to have the September meeting where we're going to have we're going to invite the genealogy interest groups, the reading circle, and of course the history roundtable, which is looking at our personal family histories and also the story about the restoration. So we're going to be looking at the restoration in a little bit depth. We're going to continue our celebration of Crossings 200. We're having Amy Boxrun, who's the executive director of the Norwegian-American Historical Association, will be talking to us in October. And then we will also on the crossings and subsequent crossings. And then in November, we're having Thomas Loftus, who is who was the ambassador to Norway from 1983 to 1987. And he's served in various government bodies. He's a prominent educator, politician, and apparently a very good speaker. And he will be talking to us in November. So we'll have a chance to, with the lodge meetings, go in depth on the crossings to 200. Does anyone want to get in the last word?
I just, it's good to see everybody, and good to see you, Bill and Pat and Gary.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So have a great rest of the summer.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to be in Norway for the August, so I'll probably have something to report on that. So hope that's good. So yeah, thank you.
Go tour.
Yeah. Anything? Any other comments? Thank
Thanks,
everybody for their
thanks
comments.
everybody.
So, okay, guys, I hope you can make some of the meetings we have in the fall, and I'll be sending out the Zoom information so that you be able to attend by Zoom if if you're not living in the Washington D.C. area. So, have a great summer.
Thank
You too.
Okay, bye.
Thanks, Bill.
Bye.
Thanks for running this